All right. Well, we are certainly so excited to be here for our Cannabis on Campus workshop. We're going to get started by introducing ourselves and telling you about what you have gotten yourselves into with us. So I'll get us started. My name is Kalia Harris. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm based here in so-called Richmond, occupied Powhatan land. I'm the co-executive director of the Virginia Student Power Network, and we are a statewide coalition of student organizers that are fighting for justice on our campuses and beyond throughout Virginia. I also am a co-host of a radio show, Race Capital, here in Richmond, and we examine racial narratives in Richmond. I went to George Mason University in Fairfax, Virginia. So when it comes to cannabis on campus, I have a lot of experience with the administration, the law enforcement, and the way that policies work on campus with marijuana particularly. So I'm excited to chat with you all a little bit about what this new law has in store for us. Steph, hey, can you
Hi.
tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Stephanie. I use they, them pronouns. I am a lead organizer with Virginia Student Power Network, currently in Northern Virginia.
And you went to Virginia Tech, right?
Yes, I did go to Virginia Tech. Yeah, Southwest Virginia.
Yes. And so before we get into the actual law, I wanted to share with y'all a little bit about why I'm so passionate about this issue. Love marijuana, right? As a Black person in Virginia, so many people that I love, so many people that I know have had experiences with the police and the criminal legal system due to the continued criminalization of not only Black people, but marijuana itself. And so Steph and I are coming into this with passion and personal experience to this issue. Thanks for being here, Steph. Let's dig right into it. So first we want to let y'all know what you will be going over in this workshop. So by the end of this workshop, you should understand the impact of simple possession of marijuana being legalized in Virginia for college-aged youth. You should understand some of the federal drug policies that impact colleges and universities' funding eligibility. And hopefully you'll walk away being able to articulate the ways that universities can start to adjust their policies to be more equity focused. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start to review some of this legalization legislation, like what even passed this year through the legislature, and how it is impacting youth. So to start, let's go ahead and review the legalization legislation. As of July 1st this year, 2021, simple possession of marijuana up to an ounce for individuals 21 and older is legal in Virginia. Whew. Take a deep breath, right? Yes, we did that. But what does that mean? Particularly for young folks, what does that mean? It means that anyone under the age of 21, including minors, are subjected to a civil penalty of no more than $25 for possessing marijuana, as well as mandatory substance abuse treatment or education program. Also, children under the age of 18 found in possession will be treated as delinquents in the court. I want y'all to hold that and remember that. They'll be treated by delinquents, which is a technical designation that makes them vulnerable to more severe punishments if they run into law enforcement again, including stricter probation, surveillance, and possibly detention under a law known as the valid court order exception. So there are still ways for young folks to be incarcerated with marijuana. And the other piece is $25 civil penalty for the first offense for all folks 20 and younger. So there is still that financial component. And the last piece, a class 3 misdemeanor for 18 to 20-year-olds. So the point we want to get through by sharing this is that there is still a lot of gray area, right, for people that are in this 18 to 21-year-old range, where there's a lot of ways you can still get in trouble. And if you get in trouble again, right, after that first offense, there's levels of consequence. And when we're talking about the youth impacts of marijuana enforcement in Virginia, the data shows that young people are already the most impacted by the criminalization of marijuana use. And so already we knew that 18 to 25-year-olds were the most impacted by enforcement before legalization happened. And so now that we're seeing these different tiers and consequence, we have to understand that there will be an impact moving forward for this age group. And so when we're thinking about future legislative sessions, how can we reduce the criminalization of young people through legalization? And when we think about colleges, right? Colleges are a messy place. We have folks that are underage. We have people that are well over 21, right? And so there's a whole variety of age groups that are interacting with one another. And so when you have folks that are 21 that may be hanging out with their friend, right? That or however these things happen, those also come with different implications under the law as well. And so just thinking about not only what the law says, but how are we articulating that to young people so that they know what it is that they're legally allowed to do. And what we're describing here is the possibility of the school to prison pipeline. And not only just K through 12 schools, but colleges and universities as a way of pipelining students into prisons and law enforcement and the criminal legal system. So I just wanted to name that up front. But we're going to dig into a little bit more of how this school to prison pipeline has been legislated, not only at the statewide level, but at the federal level, right? Because gratefully now Virginia has become the first state in the South to legalize simple possession of marijuana. But there are still a lot of things at the federal level that are causing some tension now on campuses with what they're able to do. So I'm gonna pass it to Steph so that we can talk a little bit about what that federal legal stuff is.
Right. So we're going to do a little review of the federal legislation that criminalizes drugs on school grounds and talk about how those laws impact how universities and colleges are funded. The Drug-Free Schools and Communities Act, also known as DFSCA of 1989, commonly known as the Drug-Free Schools and Campuses Act, requires institutions of higher education to establish policies that address unlawful possession, use, or distribution of alcohol and illicit drugs for faculty, staff, and students. And then we have the Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988, which states that the unlawful manufacture, distribution, dispensation, possession, or use of a controlled substance is prohibited. This is applicable for staff, faculty, and those otherwise employed by the university. Since marijuana is currently classified as a Schedule I drug federally, colleges and universities who accept federal education funding must remain compliant with the Drug-Free Schools and Community Act. And what this means is, some schools may and usually do prohibit cannabis use off of campus as well, as part of the student code of conduct or the honor code, which maybe some of y'all are familiar with, reading about both in public school and like higher education. If colleges and universities wish to continue receiving this funding, those schools are required to recognize the federal classification of cannabis through their regulations on campus. It is commonly believed that colleges and universities must maintain and enforce punitive drug and alcohol policies to maintain funding. In order to receive those federal fundings and comply with the Higher Education Act, schools are required to state their policies regarding drugs and alcohol. That's usually done at the beginning as you're entering school. It's kind of one of those mandatory trainings that you have to take that usually consist of reading, watching videos, and taking a quiz to say that you passed. Many colleges also list the possible legal penalties for alcohol and drug violations. As these statements are required to receive funding, these statements are not interpreted to be relevant to the relative stringency of campus drug and alcohol policies. That means that campuses don't have to be stringent, don't have to have stringent drug policies that criminalize those who use drugs. So it's clear.
Can we pause right there for a second? Um, so to me in my research, this to me was so illuminating because as a student, I thought that universities had to have super strict drug policy, right? Like they had to kick you off. You know, it was something that in order to get their funding, they must do. But what we know now is that that's not the case. They simply just have to state what their policy is. And also, some of them state the or tend to state what the local and state law enforcement, what the legal laws are. So the fact is that like just because they have to state a policy doesn't mean the policy has to be the most strict or stringent policy. And reading a lot of the policies on Virginia campuses, most of them are very stringent, as we'll see a little bit later.
Yes, and I think also it kind of does open the possibility of them choosing kind of who is the one who gets punished, which I think personally, from what I've seen, tends to be a lot of people of color or students of color. And so, kind of as Kalia was saying, at most universities in Virginia, there's that student code of conduct students are expected to adhere to during their time at the university. Many of those include the zero tolerance drug policies that classify possession of cannabis and other drugs as serious offenses that can result in disciplinary action from both the university disciplinary system and the campus or local law enforcement entities. These penalties can range from a warning to drug treatment to, in some cases, expulsion from the university. Essentially, it jeopardizes, the well-being of the student. It affects them financial aid-wise and also housing at times. So I'll pass it over to Kalia to talk a little bit more about the universities.
Yes, so we know that the federal law needs to change. That's without a doubt. But now we want to look at an example of a policy from a university, how at the state and university level there are policy changes that can happen now. So let's look at an example from Virginia Commonwealth University. Virginia Commonwealth University is in Richmond, and it's actually one of the most populated universities in the state. So let's take a look at their policy. It states, in accordance with the Federal Drug-Free Workplace Act of 1988, the Federal Drug-Free Schools and Community Act of 1989, and the Commonwealth of Virginia's policy on alcohol and other drugs, VCU prohibits the unlawful or unauthorized manufacture, distribution, dispensation, possession, or use of alcohol and illegal drugs on university property or as part of any university-sponsored activity. Any employee or student who violates this policy is subject to disciplinary action up to and including termination of employment or expulsion from the university. In addition, to protect the safety of members of the university community, VCU may refer information related to such violation to appropriate law enforcement officials and/or require satisfactory participation in an appropriate evaluation or rehabilitation program. So right there, we see all of the things that Steph just illuminated for us, right? Where they are in compliance with these laws from the 80s, and they have the latitude to terminate an employee, to expel a student, and send them to rehab or a rehabilitation program. All of those are within their policy. So now that we've taken a look at that, let's talk a little bit about what zero tolerance drug policies are and distinguish those from university sanctions. Because as we're going through this, right, there's levels to this. There's the law enforcement and the law that is in the community. There's the campus level policy and conduct. So we're going to break down some of this stuff so that you understand it a little bit more. So first, we want to talk about zero tolerance drug policies. A lot of us have heard about these, the idea of zero tolerance drug policies and their relation to school to prison pipeline. But in the sense of drug policy on campus, zero tolerance drug policies use tactics like school exclusion, which can be suspension, expulsion, um, as common disciplinary technique. So zero tolerance policies are intended to provide determined parameters that are applied equally to all students to send a clear message that whatever that thing is that they're saying they have zero tolerance for is not permitted under any circumstance. But as Steph told us earlier, we know that the ways that universities enforce drug policy is inequitable. And that's shown through data of who actually gets expelled, of who has the best retention, right? And so thinking about those things. But this air of zero tolerance has been very normalized through the 90s into today, right? Where there is this, you can lose your financial aid, your housing, you can lose it all, right, as a student by getting a drug charge. But let's think about what university sanctions are. So a sanction at a university is a punishment. So that might be a written warning, probation, suspension, expulsion, right? We're getting back to those things again. We know that through data, academic, legal, financial sanctions for the use of drug or possession of drugs does not reduce drug use. So just point blank. And even with that reality, most universities, particularly public universities in Virginia, have very strict sanctions for drugs, including marijuana. We just saw with VCU. Let's take an example of what sanctions look like at another university. We'll actually take a look at my alma mater, George Mason, which is, I think, maybe the second largest in the state, although that may have changed. So this is George Mason's sanctions for students with marijuana. A common sanction for a student's first violation, including possession or use of marijuana, is likely to range from a written warning to disciplinary probation period, with an addition of an educational referral. A fee for this service will be imposed. Repeated violations are likely to result in a suspension or dismissal from housing and/or university suspension. A common sanction for any student found responsible for a violation including sale or possession of an illegal substance, including prescription drugs and marijuana, with the intent to distribute, is expulsion. Right? Like, it's the policies say it all. And the stories back it up. Going to George Mason, I've had friends expelled. I've seen folks lose their financial aid, have to actually end school because of simple marijuana possession. Or, God forbid, you just sell it a little bit to afford going to school, right? So these are the situations that our students are in. And it's not rare as folks may want to think it is. And so these policies are their updated policies since legalization happened in July. And so these are the ways that they're still putting students through the system, because not only do you deal with the legal ramifications, because the university, of course, is going to report to the local law enforcement, but you also have to go through the university's conduct process, which often requires a hearing with their judicial board or some sort of disciplinary board of some sort. There is an appeals process. It very much looks like the criminal justice system on the university side. And so imagine yourself as a student with financial aid on the line. You just got in trouble with the cops. And now you may be on probation. You have to go through not only the criminal legal system, but your university system as well. That's a lot to deal with. And so when we're looking at numbers of why folks are dropping out, or why this is impacting grades or their financial well-being, their emotional, social well-being, it's because there's a lot of ramifications still on campuses for students that possess marijuana, that use marijuana, that dare to dream about marijuana, right? And so we want y'all to understand that, because even though the law has changed, a lot of things on campus need to change. And so now we're going to talk about that a little bit, of what's next. All right. So what are we up to, Steph? We building power. We're building youth power to legalize marijuana right in Virginia. And so that is both on campus with campus advocacy and our communities with our relational organizing and issue campaigns, and in the legislature, where we are going to be putting pressure on our legislators to legalize marijuana fully and right and with justice and equity, and in the war on drugs in Virginia. Some of our policy priorities moving forward are removing penalties and criminalization of youth with marijuana in Virginia, fighting for legalization with social equity, and that includes getting those coins with guaranteed income for those who have been impacted by the racist war on drugs in Virginia, advocating for expungement, resentencing, and release of all of those who are incarcerated for marijuana convictions, and advocating for a statewide standard for enforcement of marijuana on university campuses.
And on the campus level, we're looking ahead to reducing sanctions for marijuana-related charges, ending continued collaboration and surveillance between campus law enforcement and community law enforcement, as well as building power to reduce the scope of policing and ultimately removing police and law enforcement from Virginia campuses. And we also are looking ahead to engage in political education with Virginia youth around drug policy and enforcement.
Yes. So before we close out our session and give y'all a little bit of time to reflect, we want to share some ways to stay involved with VSPN and our fight to center justice, repair, and reparations through legalization. First, if you are a young person and you're listening to this and you're like, yes, hell yes, I'm trying to legalize it right in Virginia, please fill out our interest form. You can find that right below. It is bit.ly/VSPN interest, all lowercase. We want to get involved with you, so please fill it out so that we can get in contact with you. Everyone, please be sure to follow us on social media at VA Student Power on all platforms. So that's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Follow us. And if you add a .org to that, vastudentpower.org, that is our website. Visit to learn more about us, our mission, and see some cute pictures. And if you have access to wealth or otherwise want to donate to making our work sustainable, we invite you to donate to VSPN by visiting our Act Blue and becoming a monthly sustainer or a one-time donor. But we do give our monthly donors of $5 and more a little gift, so just saying. But yeah, those are the ways to stay connected with us, and we would love to build with you as we continue to legalize it right in this coalition.
So thank you so much, Kalia, for providing us all that information. To close out this session, we would like to give you all some time to reflect on what we've gone through and what you're taking away from this session. At this time, we invite you to reflect on 1 to 2 takeaways that you're bringing away from this session. So definitely feel free to jot those down and keep them with you.